In order to create the top frame, we're going to use the copy of the grid that we made earlier. First of all, I'm going to rename this to outer frame. And the first thing I want to do here is select all the polygons, and I'm going to melt them. And if I go to point mode, you can see we have all of these points that we don't need anymore. We could delete these manually, or we could go to Mode, Modeling, and here we have a Mesh Checking tab. If I enable Mesh Check, I have an option here that is called Edge Points, and you can see the edge points highlighted in blue. We can select all of these and then switch off, enable Mesh Check, and you can see we have all these points selected. We can simply delete them now. First of all, I'm going to adjust the shape a little bit. I'm going to move these points down to about here. I'm going to move these points over to about here. And I'm also going to make a loop cut here. The way I'm going to do this top frame is I'm going to split this up into two parts. One will be the shape on the outside, and one will be the grid. And I want these to be two separate objects because I don't want all of the geometry that will be created by that grid to continue across the frame on the outside here. I'm going to ring select these edges, and I'm going to use connect points edges twice, and this will give us these three lines here. We don't really need these edges. I'm going to delete them, and let's select these ones. And I'm just going to move these over a little bit to the center of one of these grids. And then I'm going to use Bevel. And maybe let's adjust the offset a little bit. So I'm going to do something like this. It's going to look a little bit differently than the original, which was made from only a single object. So now that we've got this, we can select these two polygons here, and I'm going to split these off. So this will be our actual grid, and this one will be our top frame. And I'm going to delete these two polygons from the top frame here. So now we've got this basic shape, and we continue adding the cutouts, and then we're going to add the rest of the details. So I'm going to start by making some loop cuts. We'll need one here. We're also going to need an edge for this area here. So I'm going to make another cut about here. And let's add one here. And now we can select these two edges here and delete them. So getting this cut out here. And over here, I'm going to make a cut like this, and then cut straight across. And then we can delete these edges here to get this corner. And let's continue over here. Again, I'm going to make a cut like this. And maybe let's adjust the position here a little bit. And I'm going to make another cut here. Let's move this over a little bit. And I'm going to make a cut from this point over to here. And now we can delete this polygon. And over here, I'm going to make a cut like this. Let's move it to about here. And we're going to need another cut here and here. move this point over. In fact, let's move these points over as well a little bit. And delete these two polygons. And we need another cut here. And here. And over here. So now we can get rid of these polygons, optimize the object, and I'm going to move these edges down a little bit. And these ones, or this one, I'm going to move up a little bit like this. So let's continue by adding the rest of the details. I'm going to make a cut over here. And then select this polygon and use extrude inner. I'm going to move this edge over a little bit. Now this one we need to scale. Let's switch to world mode. Scale it down to 0. And then move it into position about here. For that circle, we're going to need a cut at the center. We're also going to need one here. And let's add another one over here. I'm just going to continue this one. And we're going to need one over here as well. And in order to connect the geometry, we're going to create for this little hole here with this square shape. I'm just going to melt these polygons here. And I'm going to slide these edges over a little bit. To about here. I think we can just join the geometry here and then just get rid of these edges by dissolving them. I'm also going to get rid of these edges for now. And maybe let's just join these 2 points. Next I'm going to create a cylinder. And I'm going to move it over, snap it to where this hole is going to be, and let's scale it down. To about here. I'm going to give it 12 segments. And let's use a bool object to get that hole in there. I'm going to create a single object and hide the new edges. And let's make this editable. And I'm going to resolve the n-gons here. Like this. And I'm going to slide this point over to about here. Now we also have this round corner here. Just gonna move these points up a little bit. Well, let's move these up a little bit further. Something like this. And I'm going to bevel this point here. And let's do 6 subdivisions. Let's bring the offset down. Let's just go back. I just set this to 0. It's a bit tricky to add these details because we have this huge panel which is 4 by 3 meters, and then we have all of these little details, so using the tools can be a little bit difficult. I'm just going to use an offset of 0, hit new transform, and then I'm using the Alt key, and I'm just bringing up the offset like this. Let's do something like this. Let's see how it looks. So that's good. And now we can connect these 2 points, and I'm going to use connect points edges to remove this n-gon here. So we've got this area covered. Let's continue up here. I'm going to select this point, bevel it, and this one I'm going to make a little bit bigger. And we can weld these points here. And then remove the n-gon by connecting these points. And we have a little bit of a rounding on these corners as well. So let's go ahead and bevel this point. And maybe we could bring down the subdivisions to 4. And over here, beveling is probably going to be a problem. You can see if I try and bevel this, it's not going to work, and I think that is because it's a flat object. For some reason it's a problem to bevel a point on a corner like this. What we can do is turn these 2 polygons into a single n-gon, and now if I select this point and bevel it, it's working perfectly fine. Let's again do an offset of 0 first, and then use the Alt key and these little arrows here to adjust the offset. Let's do something like this, and now we can make a cut straight down here. We can make another cut here. And we can connect these points. Maybe let's move this one over a little bit, and then let's go ahead and remove the n-gons. Over here, I'm going to make a cut like this to split off this area from the rest of the geometry, and then I'm going to add some vertical cuts. To create the basic geometry for the details over here. And we can move these points over a little bit I think I'm going to make another cut here. So we've got these two details covered. Let's maybe continue with the ones up here. I'm going to scale these points. Then move these down. And I'm going to make another cut here. And I'm going to add 2 more cuts over here. And we can connect this point to the geometry of that bigger hole. We can also make a cut from this point over to this one, and from this one over to here, so that will get rid of the n-gon over here. And I'm going to weld these points. And let's connect these two. And over here we're going to need another edge at the center of this hole here. So I'm going to make a cut straight across and just adjust the position of these points a little bit. And we can move these ones down a little bit. As a matter of fact, I'm going to move all of these down a little bit. So something like this maybe. And I'm going to select these 2 polygons and use extrude inner. Same here. Let's scale these edges. Something like this. And I'm going to add another cylinder. Snap it to this point here. Scale it down. And I'll give it 12 segments. Let's make a copy. Move it to this position here. I'm going to scale this down a little bit. And if you want to, you can adjust the position so it's a little more accurate and matching the reference image. But it's not really necessary. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to scale this one up a little bit to about here. Oh, and it seems I just moved my cylinder. So I've just made another copy. Let's move this back to here and scale it down. And I'm going to move another copy to about here. And this one I will change a little bit. So I'm going to move these edges down. actually I need to move these edges over a little bit. And this is a very small hole, so I'm going to reduce the rotation segments to 8 for this one. I'm going to put the 4 cylinders into a null object, and then let's use a bool object, create single object and hide the new edges, and let's make this editable. And I'm also getting rid of all of these tags here, which I don't need. And now we can clean up the geometry a little bit. So let's start over here and remove the n-gons by connecting the points like this. And over here I'm going to select these points, scale them out a little bit. Now over here we need to connect this edge over to one of the points on the bigger hole. So I'm going to make a cut like this, and we're just going to remove the n-gon here by making another cut like this. Now over here I'm just going to move this point over a little bit and remove this n-gon here by adding an edge here. And over here I'm going to make 2 cuts to define the area where this little hole is going to be. And we can't use the loop knife to do that. So I'm going to start with the line cut tool and make 2 cuts like this. Let's just move these points over a little bit. And then I'm just going to continue these 2 points down to this edge here at the bottom. Maybe I'll just select these points, not these ones, and not this one. And I'm going to scale them a little bit, like so. And let's add another cut over here. And we have a little bit of a rounding on these corners here. I'm going to turn these 2 into an n-gon by melting the polygons. And then we can select these 2 points and bevel them. So we got 2 points here, which is why that bevel didn't work. I'm just going to weld them together and then try to bevel them again. So that's looking a little better. And I'm going to use connect points edges to create these edges here. And let's go ahead and remove this n-gon. And over here, I think I'm just going to delete this point and connect these two, and then connect the rest of the points to get rid of this n-gon here. Next, I'm going to close all of these holes. Select the n-gons, use extrude inner. And then just weld these points. And this one I'm going to do separately because it's so small. So I'll start with an offset of 0. And then just increase the offset here. And then weld these points. So you can see we still have 8 n-gons here, so let's go and find them and remove them. This one here we'll have to keep. We're going to model this area separately. For now it doesn't make sense to try and remove this n-gon because we still have to figure out how we can connect the geometry we're going to create for these details with the geometry over here. And over here, I think it's just a matter of making another cut down to here. And over here, let's just connect these points. And we have n-gons over here. I'm going to remove this one by just welding the points, removing this one, and this is off center. I'm just going to delete it, close that polygon hole again. But before I do, you can see we have 2 points here, and these have probably caused the problem here. So I'm just going to weld these together. Close that polygon hole, use extrude inner, turn this into point selection and weld these points, which means we have 1 n-gon left here, and I think I'm going to remove this by making a cut like this. And then I'm just going to weld these 2 points. So you can see we only have 1 n-gon left, and that's this one over here. And I think the geometry we created looks pretty good, except for this area, which we still need to fix. So I'm quite happy with this. And now we can continue and model this area here. And like I said before, we're going to do this area as a separate object. So let's go ahead and do that. So I've started a new scene file and I've loaded the reference image in the background and I've scaled it up quite a bit. And this should make modeling these tiny details a little bit easier. My favorite approach to modeling a cluster of details like this that is surrounded by areas with very little detail is to model these areas as a separate object. And what I also like to do is I like to reduce the geometry as I move from the inside, where all of these details are, to the outside, where we only have very little detail. So the goal is to end up with as few edges as possible as we reach this area here. So we'll start this with a simple spline shape. I'm going to grab the pen tool, make sure the type is set to linear, and I'm going to create the first point here on the inside of this groove. And I'm going to do this on the inside because we have these curves. And once we've created the geometry, we're going to extrude it. And the problem with extruding those curves inwards is that these corners will get very tight and we're likely to get overlapping geometry. In order to avoid that problem, we're going to create these curves on the inside of those grooves, and then we're going to extrude to the outside and we won't have that problem. So let's create our first point here, and I'm going to switch back to my move tool. Let's go to point mode, and then I'm going to quick extrude this point over to about here. And then I'm going to use quick extrude to create the rest of the shape. And I'm going to select these 2 points over here and make sure they're at 0 on the x-axis. And then we can use an extrude object. Let's change the movement to 0. And I'm going to make this editable. And then I'm going to use the polygon pen tool to create a polygon here. And I'm going to extrude this edge down and then use axis extension to line it up with the bottom edge here. Deselect everything, optimize the object, and let's use the line cut tool to create some basic edges here. And we could also select these 2 points and bevel them. I'm using 6 subdivisions here. I also have limit switched on. So I'm going to bevel these until these points here are at the same position. Deselect everything, optimize. And now we're going to take care of these holes. And when I create these holes, I want to make sure that as few edges as possible leave the area where these holes are. Let's create a plane object, and I'll give it 2 by 2 segments. And I'm going to scale it down. And before I do, I need to switch on my X and Y axes again. And I'll move it over to the position of one of these holes. Let's make this a little bit bigger. We're only going to use these as guides. So you can see we have a plane that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 points, which means we have 8 edges coming from this area here. And it's always going to be those 8 edges, no matter how many segments we use for these holes. So we can use 8 segments or 80, and as long as we make sure that we connect the edges of the hole only to the point on our reference plane here, we don't need to worry about having tons of edges that we need to continue throughout the mesh. I'm going to make a copy of this plane object, move it over to this hole here, and let's use another one and move it into position about here. And now we can create the geometry on the basis of the geometry of these planes. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to snap the knife tool to the points on the plane. Over here we can use this edge we already have. And let's maybe, well, I think I'm going to create a cut from this point down to this one maybe. And let's create some horizontal cuts like this. I'm going to continue these over here. And I'm going to continue this one. We're going to wait a little bit. Well, I guess we could create at least an edge here for now. So we're going to connect this geometry to that curved area here. Can continue this point like so. I guess we could make a cut all the way up to here. And over here I'm going to make a cut like this, and we could make a cut here. Maybe connect these 2 points, and let's do another cut straight across here. We're going to need some edges here, and we're also going to need edges here and here, and let's make sure to continue these. Just going to snap some of these points into position. So let's continue maybe over here. I'm going to make a cut like this and connect these 2 points. Over here, I'm going to continue this cut. And then maybe start connecting the points like this. And let's move all of these over to this corner here. And maybe I'll move this over to here, so we only need one more cut down here. Let's also continue this edge. And sometimes it's helpful if you switch on the cell renderer, or if you have n-gon lines activated. If you do a render, you kind of get a suggestion on how Cinema 4D would resolve these n-gons. So up here, that's actually a pretty good idea. So I'm going to use connect points edges to connect the points like this. And before we continue, we could also try and add some of the curves that we have in here. So a lot of these corners are actually round. So let's maybe start down here. We could select these 2 points and bevel them. I'm going to use only 4 subdivisions here maybe. And let's bevel this like so, and we could make a cut straight across, get rid of this edge or these 2 edges, make sure these 2 points are connected, and I'm going to make 2 cuts like this. So I'm also going to try and keep the geometry created by these rounded corners in this area here. And if possible, I won't continue these edges. So we only have 1 additional edge coming from each of these corner areas here. Now up here, beveling will be a bit of a problem because we have these edges that are very close together. I'm just going to dissolve this one for now. I'll also get rid of these ones. I'll make the offset a little bit bigger. Maybe something like this. And up here, I'm going to connect these 2 points and again make 2 cuts like this. So we're going to keep the edges we will need here inside of this area here. I'm also going to add a bevel here. Let's make this a little bit smaller. And over here, we could just, well, actually before I do that, we have these 2 edges down here. We can connect them to these 2 points, which would be perfect. And then let's maybe cut from one of these points straight across, and then we can connect these 2 points And we could also start removing the n-gons. Let's do the same up here. Just going to select these, remove the n-gons. You could keep the quads if you wanted to, but I'm just going to triangulate these. We'll have to wait a little bit with this corner here, but actually I think what I will do is I'll just connect these 2 points, and I'll just connect this edge and then connect these points like this. And then we only have one edge, or one additional edge, instead of all of these edges that we need to connect to this geometry here. I'm not sure yet how I want to do this corner, but I'll probably do something like this. So let's make a cut here and make a cut here. Because again, I want to keep the edges created by this area inside of this area and not propagate to the rest of the mesh. Let's just remove the n-gons and triangulate. Same down here. I'm going to remove the n-gons and triangulate. I'm also going to add a bevel here. And let's make a cut. And then I'm just going to connect these points here. Let's make sure to weld these together. And connect these points here. And over here I'm going to turn this into an n-gon by melting the polygons, so I can bevel this point. And we can probably connect these 2 points here. And let's connect 2 of these points for now. So something like this. Maybe we could also move these ones over a little bit. So we have our basic shape. There's some areas that we still need to fix in terms of n-gons, but I'm going to wait a little bit longer until I've added the geometry for the holes. And I think we also need a round corner here. So let's just go ahead and melt these polygons. Bevel this point. Maybe connect these ones, and I'll just wait until I have the geometry for that hole before I resolve the rest of these edges here. So let's add a cylinder. I'm going to snap it to one of these points here, scale it down quite a bit. I'm going to do this one really low poly. Let's just do 8 segments here. And the reason is, if you take a look at the entire panel, and if you render this, this is the area where these details are. So assuming that we're not going to do any close-ups of this area, we can really save a lot of polygons by not using too many edges for those holes here. I think we can switch off these planes. So I've made a copy of this cylinder. I'm going to snap it over to here and then create some more copies. I'm going to put all of these in a null object and then use a bool object to create the holes. Let's create a single object and hide the new edges. Make this editable. And let's start removing the n-gons. So here I can just connect some of the points. Over here things are a little bit more complicated. Let's just weld all of these points to here, and we can now let's connect these 2 points. That's gonna be fine, I think. And we have 2 points over here. Let's go ahead and weld them. Make 2 cuts here to get rid of the n-gons. So in order to get rid of the n-gon up here, I think what I'll do is I'll just make a cut from this point to this point, and I'll make another cut here, which means we can get rid of this edge. And over here I'll make 2 cuts like this to connect these 2 points. So just playing around with the geometry. So we could do something like this maybe. And we have a triangle here and an n-gon here. We could get rid of this n-gon by welding these 2 points, and we could move these points down a little bit. Now we can dissolve this edge, which will give us a quad here. And let's just make a cut over here and dissolve these edges. Maybe I'll move these ones over a little bit. And over here, I'm going to connect some points to get rid of the n-gons. Let's delete this one. And we could get rid of this n-gon just by connecting these points like I just did. And over here, we could connect these points, delete these ones, and I think I'm just going to make a cut from this point to here. Let's weld these 2 points. Going to connect these ones and then just remove this n-gon by connecting the points like this. So we still have one n-gon. So what we could do here is maybe make a cut like this. Move this point over. And let's move this one down a little bit. Something like this maybe. And now I'm going to close these holes. Select the n-gons. Use extrude inner. And let's just weld all of these points. So now I'm going to select the edges on the outside. Let's do a boundary loop selection. And I'm just going to deselect these edges here. And I'm going to extrude these edges out to get our groove. And we have some problems in these areas here where we get overlapping geometry, and also we're losing the curve here. So let's go ahead and fix those areas by, first of all, welding these points. And then I'm going to turn these areas into n-gons. I'll scale these points down to 0 to get a straight line here. Same here. Let's undo that. I'm going to deselect this point and then use axis extension to snap all of these points to this one. Let's try that again. Oh, we should scale these first. So that's looking a lot better. Now let's select all of these points here. And bevel them. And then I'm just going to connect the geometry. Let's see if we can just remove the n-gons. Yeah, that's not working too well. So I'm just going to do this manually. We also need to create geometry in between here. So let's use the polygon pen tool. And we need an additional edge here. So let's go ahead and make a cut. And we could make another cut here and here, and then dissolve this edge to terminate this here, because we can't really connect the edge to our hole down here. So now we can create some more polygons in between here. I'm going to make a cut over like this, and then just close this polygon hole, connect these 2 points, and let's remove the n-gons and triangulate. And next I'm going to select the edges on the outside again, except for these ones. And I'm going to use extrude. Let's extrude these out. And now we can weld these points. So we're reducing the number of edges as we move along here towards the outside. I'm going to weld these points and these ones, and then just move these up a little bit and scale them. Same here. And down here. So I'm going to move these down a bit, scale them out a bit. And we need to weld these points here and these ones. And next I'm going to extrude some edges. First of all, I'm going to select these ones. I'm going to extrude them down. Select all of these edges and scale them. And then we need to make a couple of cuts. And then we can create the geometry in between these areas here. Same up here. Let's select these edges, move them up to about here. Select these ones. Let's scale these. I'm going to move these up a little bit further. And I'll make some cuts. And then create the polygons to close this gap here. So that's looking good. And next I'm going to select the edges on the outside again, deselect these ones, and I'm going to extrude these one more time. And I'm going to scale these ones down to 0. Move them over a little bit. And now we're going to reduce the polygon count a little bit more. But before I do, I think I'll just try and even out the geometry a little bit. So maybe something like this. And I'm using a script from the HB modeling bundle called Even Distribution to be able to do that. And let's see, over here I'm going to do the same thing. let's make a cut across like this, and then use the polygon pen. And what I'll do is I'll just weld the points like this. And then I can dissolve these edges here. So that means I'm reducing the number of edges I have to bring down to this area. And you can see there's almost no detail down there, so all of this geometry wouldn't make a lot of sense down here. And I'll do the same thing up here. And over here. Same procedure as before. So we're ending up with 17 edges on the outside here. If you take a look, we would have a lot more edges here. So it would be, if I select these edges down here, you can see it's 11 edges, and I only have 5 edges left down here. So that's reducing the polygon count quite a bit as we move outside of this area. And that's a good thing because we don't really have a lot of detail or any detail at all over here on the side and down here at the bottom. So maybe we could even change that. Do something like this. Get rid of these edges and reduce the edge count even a bit more. So we only have 4 edges left here. Let's get rid of this point. And we don't have any n-gons left. If I put this in the symmetry object, we now have the layout for the details that we're going to add later on. And there's one more thing we need to do, which is this area here with that groove. And for this one I'm going to start with a new object. I'm going to use a plane. Let's give it 2 by 2 segments. Make it editable. going to scale these edges down to the inside of that groove. And then we can select the points on the outside, on the corners. Oh, need to move these ones up a little bit. And let's bevel these. I'm going to do 6 subdivisions. Well, actually, I think we need the bottom part because it's not symmetrical top to bottom. But maybe we could make it symmetrical by just dissolving this edge and then ring selecting these edges and connecting them. So we're getting an edge right at the center of our other details here. And we should be able to join the objects and use symmetry here. So I'm going to remove the n-gons from this area, triangulate. I'm going to make a cut here. Let's maybe snap it to this point. And we could then connect this point down to this one. I'm going to select the edges on the outside, deselect these ones, extrude to get that groove, and I'm going to extrude one more time, then select these points here, I'm going to weld them, move them up a bit, move them over. Scale them. And this last extrusion, again, I did that to reduce the number of edges that we have on the outside of this area where the details are. And of course we need to connect this geometry to this geometry here, so we need a couple more cuts. Like this. And let's use symmetry. I'm going to switch the plane to XY. Let's make this editable. I'm going to move these edges down. make a cut. Well, actually we don't need to. Let's just delete these points and move these ones over. And then I'm just going to snap these points into position here. And down here we have one additional edge, which means that we need one more cut down here. I'm also going to delete these points here. Actually, I'm just going to delete this one. Or let's delete this polygon instead. And I'm going to snap these points down to here. Deselect everything, optimize the object. And let's add some more cuts over here so we can connect the geometry on the side of these objects as well. So let's select both of these objects, use connect objects and delete, optimize, and I'm going to select these edges here and these ones over here, and then use stitch and sew to close the geometry. And you need to hold down shift to be able to do that. And let's just switch to polygon mode, select all the polygons, and you can see the normals are not aligned, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to reverse the normals. If I use symmetry, I now have the entire area where these details are. And now we can use this piece of geometry, copy it into our other file and connect it to the top frame. So let's go ahead and copy our object. I'm going to paste it into the other file. And I'm going to move it roughly into position. And scale it down. Scale it up again a little bit. And I'll make it editable. And first of all, I'm going to select the edges on the sides of this object, and I'm going to extrude them. And then select these edges and snap them to the top frame. Same over here. And I'm going to select the bottom edges and extrude them down, and then snap them to this edge down here. I'm also going to select the top frame and I'll make a cut straight across here. And now we can get rid of this area down here. If I select these edges here, you can see we have 12 edges, and we need to connect them to 8 edges down here. And there's a number of ways you could do that. You could just move some of these edges down and connect the others to this area here, or we could try and reduce the edges up here, and I think that's what I'm going to do. So we'll turn those 12 edges into 8 edges. I'm going to make a cut like this, and then use the polygon pen tool, and I'm going to weld 2 points over here, and I'm also going to weld 2 points over here. So now we can dissolve these edges here, and that means we only have 8 edges left. So now what we can do is we can create cuts to connect the geometry. And it seems that didn't work. So I'll just try this again. And it's still not working. Not sure why. I think the reason may be that these edges are not lined up properly. So I'm going to snap them. And now let's try this again. And this time it is working. We could also try and even out the geometry a little bit. Let's just select these edges. And maybe I'll move these ones over a little bit. And I forgot one cut here. And then we could select these edges here and also even them out. And like before, I'm using the even distribution script from the HB modeling bundle to do that. So that's looking good. Let's go ahead and select both of these objects and use connect objects and delete to turn them into a single object. Deselect everything and optimize. Let's check for n-gons. We have 2, so let's go and find them. Down here we have 2 points that we need to weld. Same on the other side. And we still have these 2 n-gons. And I'm just going to try and delete these. Optimize again. And you can see we don't have any n-gons left now. So that's not looking too bad. And if you wanted to, you could reduce the geometry down here a little bit further. So we could make 2 cuts like this, and then use the polygon pen tool, weld some of these points. But let's wait a second. I think what I'll do is I'll also even out the geometry here a little bit. So I'm going to select these edges and use the even distribution script. Going to weld these points here, and we can get rid of all of these edges here. I think I screwed up over here. Let's just weld these points. I'll just line these up. And over here, I'm just going to weld these points here to the edge, and we can get rid of this edge here. I'm going to make a copy of that top frame and keep it as a backup. So now we can start and turn this into a three-dimensional object. I'm going to select the edges on the outside, deselect these ones here, and I'm going to extrude them with an offset of 0. And then I'm just going to move them down 2 centimeters. And I'm going to select all of these edges here. And bevel them. Let's start with an offset of 0 and then just use the Alt key. And I'm not going to use any subdivisions here. And it's still not working. Let's go to point mode and optimize the object. So a lot of points have been removed. Let's go back to edge mode. I'm going to bevel again, and that is looking a lot better. Just going to render this and see how it looks. So a small offset like this should be sufficient to give us some highlights on the main shape of this object here. And note that I have the mitering set to uniform to make sure that we get nice and clean bevels. Just checking. We seem to have a bit of an issue here. So I'm going to undo this. I'm going to turn this into an n-gon. I just undid this again, and it seems we have a bit of an issue here. I'm just going to delete this polygon, and let's see, that's a bit tricky. And I'm going to delete this polygon, close that polygon hole, and connect these 2 points. Go back to edge mode. Bevel the edge again, and that's still not working the way it should, so maybe I will turn these into n-gons after all. So let's just go back to polygon mode. I'm going to melt these polygons, go back to edge mode, bevel, and this is working a lot better. I'm going to remove this n-gon by connecting some of these points again. And maybe I'll move these ones just over to this point. So now we can start extruding all those little details. I'll start over here. Let's select this polygon. I'm going to do an extrude inner. So let's select this polygon, and I'll start with those rectangular shapes. And let's extrude these down a bit. So 0.5 looks good. Next I'm going to select the holes. Let's extrude these down, maybe -1. Go to edge mode and select the edges here. I'm going to bevel these just a little bit. Let's do maybe 0.13. I'm going to add the same bevel to the other holes as well. And next I'm going to extrude all of the details in this area here. Let's start by selecting all of these holes. Well, you might as well select the rest as well. And using the loop selection, I'm going to select these polygons here. And these ones. And let's extrude these down. So -1 may be a bit much. Let's do maybe something like this. So that's looking good. Going to put this in a symmetry object and add another symmetry. Let's switch on our outer frame. Just going to name everything. So this is our top frame. And this is our outer frame. We're going to need 2 symmetry objects for this one as well. And this is looking really good. So the last thing we need to do is the grid areas to fill in these gaps here. So let's go ahead and do those and finish this SciFi floor panel. So let's make a copy of the grid we created earlier. And I'm going to delete this polygon here, optimize the object, and let's switch off the top frame and the outer frame. So first of all, I'm going to ring select these edges here, and let's use edge cut with 5 subdivisions. And then I'm going to ring select these edges here, use edge cut again, and I'm going to use 41 subdivisions here. And now I'm going to select all of the polygons and use extrude inner, switch off preserve groups, and I'll make the offset a little bit smaller. Maybe something like this. And I'm going to extrude these polygons down. Let's do -1. And I'm going to select this boundary loop of edges. I'm going to deselect these ones here, and I'm going to extrude these down -2 centimeters, and we need to use an edge angle here, so let's bring this to 90 degrees. And then I'm going to select all of these edges and use my rectangle selection tool, switch on tolerance selection, and I'm going to deselect the bottom ones. And I'm going to add a bevel to these edges here. And you can see we have a bit of a problem on these corners. Let's undo this. And what I'll do to avoid this problem is I'm going to turn these polygons into an n-gon. Let's do the same thing over here. And then I'm going to select these edges again, deselect the bottom ones, bevel, and you can see now this is working as expected. And let's increase that bevel a little bit, maybe to 0.15. And I'm going to remove the n-gons by connecting the points. Next, I'm going to select all of the polygons. I'm going to split them off. Select the copy. And I'm going to snap the object axis of the copy to this corner here. And now we can switch off the object axis, switch on the copy of the original grid, which only consists of these two polygons, and I'm going to snap this object over to this polygon here. And now we can select both of these objects, use connect objects and delete to turn them into a single object. And let's use two symmetry objects. I'm going to rename these to grid. And this is our finished SciFi panel. Let's do a render, see how it looks. And it looks like I accidentally used an older version of the outer frame and not the one we finished in one of the previous videos. So what I'll do is I'll try and find the file with that finished frame. I think it was this one. Yeah. So I'm going to copy this frame and move it to my new file here. So this is the finished outer frame. And I wanted to make a few final adjustments to this one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these edges here and just even them out a little bit. And then I'm going to reduce the edge count a little bit. So what I'll do is I'll make a cut here and make sure you have visible only switched off so you can cut the polygons that you can see as well. And then I'm going to weld some of these points so we can get rid of these edges by dissolving them. And I'll move these ones over a bit. And let's dissolve these edges here. And now we can select these loops and dissolve them. So this is cleaning up the geometry quite a bit at the back here. It does create an n-gon here, and I'm getting rid of that by making a cut here, another one here, and another one here, and then we can dissolve this edge. And I'm just going to straighten these edges here just a little bit. So let's do a render of this. And this is the finished SciFi floor panel. Congratulations if you actually made it to the end of this tutorial. It took quite a bit of staying power to model this SciFi floor panel. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching everyone, and take care.